Hello. Welcome back to Down the Rabbit Hole. We're on episode 173. Yes, 173. And we are talking about the Carnton Plantation. Now, this is Down the Rabbit Hole where we talk about history, haunted history. Um, my mind just went blank. Okay, let's try that again. This is Down the Rabbit Hole where we talk about history, haunted history, weird history, people of history, weird topics, random topics, conspiracies possibly, and many more topics because we like to go down the rabbit hole and educate and discuss them, right? Well, today we're going to be talking about a plantation. Cancel me all you want if you want me to. I don't care. Now, with that being said, let's jump into today's episode, shall we? If you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also, please subscribe. Help a girl out. Um, to, so the Carnton is a historic plantation that was built in 1826 in Franklin, Williamson County, Tennessee. The property comprises of about 1,400 acres, give or take, which played an important role during and immediately after the Civil War, after the Battle of Franklin. During the American Civil War, which was situated less than 1 mile from the location of the 1864 Battles Union Eastern Plain, and it became the principal contemporary field hospital, tending to the wounded. Now, more than 1750, 1,750 Confederate soldiers lost their lives at Franklin, and on the Carnton back porch, four deceased Confederate generals' bodies were laid out for a few hours after the battle, and the life of Carrie McGavick, who lived at the Carnton during the Civil War, was the subject of the best-selling novel in 2005 by Robert Hicks, entitled The Widow of the South. Now, the house was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1973, and it became a museum managed by the Battle of Franklin, which was a non-trust, a nonprofit organization. Now let's talk about the mansion and the grounds, shall we? Carlton is a red brick federal style 11-room residence that was completed in 1826 by Randall McGavitt, who was a union who was using slave labor, and it was built at the time of the limestone foundation. The southern faces entrance a facade of 2 stories, a 5 blade block with a side facing gable roof covered in tin. Now, with two dormer windows, a slightly projecting chimneys, a central 2 story um, pediment portico in the Greek Revival style was added in 1847 by his son, John. Now, a 2 story portico contains a 4 square ionic columns which beveled and recessed panels such as simple vase shapes, balustrades on each level. Now, the balustrade um, encloses on the second story balcony decorative corals and scroll work that are found on the fascia above the first level. Now, and the columns in the corners of the portico are marked by pilasters on the front facade. Now, let's talk about the interior, because isn't that what we want to talk about? Well, the interior is a Greek revival due to the remodeling done by John McGavick in 1947. It includes then fashionable wallpapers, faux paintings, carpets in most every room. And the three distinct wallpaper patterns from have been recovered on the third floor as well. Now, the working clock in the parlor mantle, around 200 pieces china set in the room as well. So now Randall McGavitt would plant cedars along the driveway leading up to the house with while the sun extended you had to okay extended cedars along the driveway while the sun extended the planting and cedars boxwood of of herringbone patterned brick walls. Now he had also been installed between the portico and the drive-in in preparation for his marriage in 1847 to Carrie Winder. John McGavick created a 1 acre to his garden, and the working garden had vegetable squares as well. Now the garden was surrounded by a white picket fence as well as a high board fence on the north side. Now let's talk about the Confederate cemetery for a minute. So, to the northwest of the house is a 2 acre on the property is the McGavick Confederate Cemetery as well. Okay, let's talk about the history. Because we can't talk about this place without talking about the history that comes with it. Because I believe that history needs to be taught and learned in schools and everything. I got a hole in my sock. Lovely. Um, sorry, squirrel brain there for a moment. But anyway, in the 19th century, Randall McGavick, who will migrate from Virginia, settled in Nashville, becoming a prominent local politician. He was served as the mayor for Nashville for one term in 1824 and was acquainted with President James K. Polk and was good friends with President Andrew Jackson. Okay, y'all, it's not a secret. I hate Andrew Jackson. Really do. I know. He's not my favorite president. Oh, the guy was a complete douchebag and everything else. I have episode set on him that I'm gonna have to put my bias aside though, because it's history. We gotta learn about history, right? But anyway, Jackson resided at the Hermitage near Nashville, where Jackson was a guest at McGavick's on more than one occasion. And McGavick named the property near Franklin after his father's birthplace in County Antrim, Ireland. Now, the name Carnton was derived from the Gaelic, which means palace stones, and the cairn sometimes mean Mark's burial site. Now, the first construction of the Carnton was a smokehouse constructed in 1850, which was adjoined to the main house, built in 1826 in the kitchen wing. And the mansion sat on 1,400 acres. And among the crops that the McGavis grew in the mid 19th century in Middle Tennessee were wheat, corn, hay, potatoes. The McGavis were also involved in raising and breeding the livestock throughout thoroughbred horses. Randall McGavis daughter Elizabeth married William Gals Harding of Belmead Plantation, becoming an internationally renowned thoroughbred. Now, Randall McGavick died in 1843, leaving the Carlton to his son John. In December 1848, John married his cousin Carrie Winder, which this was completely normal back then. Seriously. Marrying your cousins were completely normal, apparently, and why do we have to do this every time, right? Oh, now. But anyway, and Thibodaux, Louisiana. Now, Carrie, Wyndham McGavick became the subject of the 2005 Robert Hicks novel, The Window of the South, based on her life. In the book, became a New York Times bestseller. And she brought with her slaves, the slave Mariah Riddick, and the couple had 5 children, but only 2 would survive in adulthood. Upon her marriage to McGavick she started to renovate the house, preparing the then fashionable Greek revival style. And just prior to the Civil War, John McGavick's net worth was 339,000, which is equivalent to about six million today. Well, 2007. So that's probably what 12 million, maybe. I don't know. I'm not doing math in my head. But let's talk about the Battle of Franklin now. Um, but John McGavitt was 46 when the Civil War broke out, and he was too old to enlist. But he helped the outfit and organized groups of Southern soldiers, and Carey contributed to the war effort by sewing uniforms and relatives and friends. And as the war got closer to home, John McGavitt sent most of his slaves to Louisiana so they wouldn't be taken by federal authorities. When the Federal troops took Middle Tennessee and took control of Middle Tennessee and learned of his efforts to aid the South, they took thousands of dollars worth of grain, horses, and cattle and timber from the plantation. On November 30th, 1864, Carnton became the largest temporary field hospital for attending to the wounded and dying after the Battle of Franklin. And the home was situated less than a mile from the location of the activity that took place in the Union Eastern Plain as well. Now, um, n- plain. Now, more than 1,750 Confederates lost their lives in Franklin. At Franklin. And Cornton's back porch, four Confederate general bodies, Patrick Claymore and John Adams, Arthur S. Stroll, and Hiram B. Granberry, were laid out for a few battles after the battle. And the McGavis tended as many as 300 soldiers inside Cornton alone. Through to at least 150 died that first night, and hundreds of them were widespread throughout the rest of the property, including the slave cabins. Now, Carey donated food, clothing, and supplies to the care for the wounded and the dying as well. Dying. And witnesses say her dress was blood soaked at the bottom, and her two children, Hattie, who was 9 at the time, and Winder, who was 7, witnessed the carnage as well, providing some basic assistance to the surgeons. So, after the battle on December 1st, Union forces under Major General John E. Schofield evacuated toward Nashville, leaving all the dead, including several hundred Union soldiers, and the wounded, um, who were unable to walk as well. Now, the residents of Franklin were traced back to the task of burying over 2,500. Most of them became Confederates, according to John Coleman's history of the Confederate cemetery. Now, although all of the Confederates dead were buried in possible as nearly as possible by stakes, close to where they fell. Um, Now, over the next 18 months, many of the markers were rotting or used firewood, which was in the writing and stuff. Now, to preserve the graves, John and Carrie donated 2 acres owned to the property to be designated as an area for Confederate dead to be reinterred. Now, the citizens of Franklin raised the funding, and the soldiers were exhumed and reburied at the McGavock Confederate Cemetery for a sum of $5 per soldier. That's probably a lot back then, honestly. Now, a team of individuals by George Colbert took responsibility for the burial operation of 1,481 soldiers and one civilian, a Marcellus Corbett, as well. Now let's in the 20th century. Um, Now let's talk about the 20th century, okay? Harry McGivitt managed to make the maintenance of the cemetery with African American workers for 41 years until her death in 1905. And in a prayer, a Confederate magazine would mention her in 1905. Now, let's go on to the 21st century. Now, became listed as a National Register of Historic Places in 1973. Carnton has never received any funding or support for local, state, or federal government. Excuse me. Now, the site was managed by the Battle of Franklin Trust, a nonprofit organization who manages another historic Battle of Franklin home, as well as the Carter House. But that is it for this episode. You can join me next time as we talk about Altamont, Tennessee. Y'all have a great day and a happy Thanksgiving and War Eagle.